I know you've talked a lot about in the past about like sharing your stories and experiences as a rural person, and maybe experiences that we don't typically link to, I guess, that demographic or that location. Can you kind of talk about how you did that with this particular record?
Yeah, I think that, something I always love to do is just kind of, maybe portray the South and rural communities for what they are, which is complex but also very beautiful. So a lot of the images I would use in certain songs are definitely, you know, regional or kind of harken back to my childhood. One of the tracks talks about a killdeer mama, which if you read that in the lyric sheet, it's going to say killdeer, which is a type of bird that was everywhere where my dad farms. Mm-hmm. And, that's kind of like a little bit of a picture of who I am, because that's a very Southern way of saying that name. So I like to add, just little tidbits of who I am and where I come from, and as much as I can, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you deal, I guess, personally with the weird backlash that you've gotten for being a queer artist from a rural place and like being vocal about that?
Yeah, I would say, the internet gives people access to everybody, right? So it was kind of a strange thing to see something that I've totally accepted about myself for people. For the people who had problems with it. And it was honestly, since Old Time Feelin' and Space and Time from Old Time Feelin' was a song that I wrote about an experience with kind of not being accepted from certain community members and people who were close to me. And it's interesting, the last track of this record, Keeper of the Time, kind of, for me, was coming full circle with the trauma of that, and also during the pandemic, being able to process the reality that those same people, no matter what I do in life, even though I thought I was doing something anyone could be proud of, they're not going to be proud of anything I do because, well, I'm going to be doing it while gay.
Yeah.
So it's just, I think, writing Keeper of the Time from Teeth Marks was kind of a healing and accepting moment of that there's still going to be people who just can't swallow who you are.
Right, exactly. Their loss.
Mm-hmm.
Their
Exactly.
loss. So Max Martinez in the chat is saying, is there a song from your new album that has a special meaning for you? I imagine they all do, but is there one in particular?
Well, back to the things you were talking about, I really hate naming songs. And so I've only named one song that I'm proud of. I have a track off this record called Patron Saint of the Dollar Store,
Yes.
which is also throwing it back to my rural roots because, if you've been to the South lately, there's a dollar store on every corner, even in towns with like 50 people. It's just everywhere. But, which the song, there's not much in it about the dollar store, but I was really proud of that song because on Old Time Feeling, I also mentioned the dollar store in my song The Way I Talk, so it doesn't make sense why I would be proud of that. But I hope records to come will all have a mention of the dollar store in them.
Okay, question. This is very random. What are your like top 2 items that you have to get from the dollar store when you go?
Oh my goodness. I'm the type of shopper that likes to fill up buggies and walk around with them for a while and then have buyer's remorse and just leave the whole store with nothing.
Yep.
So I would say what do I need from the dollar store most often would probably just be cheaper cat litter.
Okay.
I would say that's number one. I'll just pop down and get a little, fix up my boy at home. But yeah, I would say cat litter. I'm going to stick with that.
I love that. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other tracks on the album. Work Until I Die. I feel like it has more like an upbeat feel to it. Mm-hmm. But can you kind of talk a little bit about how that came together?
Yeah, so that actually is the only track off the album that's a co-write, and it's a co-write with a longtime friend of mine, Matt Rowan. And I have been begging him to let me write with him for years. I've been playing music with him for 12 years now. And so he's also playing all over Teeth Marks, the album. And so most of the guys that I've played music with come from kind of post-punk backgrounds. But the message of that song with workers' rights and understanding your situation as a worker, I was like, it spoke to me, so I wanted it. So I was excited when he agreed to let me put it on the album, and then I reworked some of the verses and added a little thing at the end, which was a prayer my brother said growing up. I was raised in a real conservative, kind of religious situation, and except instead of having like Christ or something, and I put the company's name. So it's a special song, but it's probably upbeat and kind of more a little bit punk driven because of Matt's influence.
Yeah.
And where he comes from, and I love that I've cut my teeth playing with post punk bands. So it's just kind of a real special, I guess, or symbolic thing of our friendship and what music has meant for us over the years.
Yeah, I love that a lot of your music does touch on different subjects that may, for a lot of people, seem like things they don't necessarily want to talk about, or maybe don't want to like face head to head. I mean, you even kind of touch on like the opioid crisis as well. Where do you get that from? Like that, I guess, I don't know if bravery is the right word, but kind of. Like you're bold enough to have these conversations that a lot of people just kind of want to stay away from.
Well, I mean, music historically has been a driving force for political change and social change. And, so many songs were things that maybe even sparked it. And I think as far as the song If You Were Someone I Love, which is the one that I make reference to the opioid crisis, I've lost people to that. And honestly, we're maybe one person away from knowing someone who has a personal experience with that. And it is really strange that more people aren't drawing attention to it with music, because, and as far as why I would, write things like that, I don't, I guess I just write what I see.
Yeah.
So unfortunately that's something that we're all seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because you have the a cappella version of that song, and it almost feels like, listening to the both of them, it feels like two different songs kind of, but it feels like the a cappella forces you to really just listen to the words and like, again, kind of like if it's one of those things that you didn't want to talk about or hear about, you're forcing people to listen. And I just love that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, when the vinyl comes out, it will actually be one track. And, that song, I started writing it, probably the earliest recording I could find on an old phone might be from 2015.
Wow.
So it took me a really long time to think that I had said what I needed to say, and I was actually in the studio recording the rock side of that track, and was driving home in the van by myself and started singing the lines about the Killdeer Mama. And I realized that what that song called for was the whole story, so you needed to end that track with the listener coming in to contact with the person who loved the subject in that song.
Yeah.
Whereas in the early, or the first part, the rockin' part, it's from the perspective of someone who doesn't love the subject and is admitting that they would treat them differently if they did.
Yeah, so interesting. Do you feel like your best writing happens when you're back in Kentucky?
I mean, everything good happens when you're back in Kentucky, I would say there is something, really peaceful about being back at home. When I'm not on tour or anything, I work for an older gentleman on his farm and help with taking care of his property. And I've always done manual labor since I was a child. Like I said earlier, my dad's a farmer. And so there is something about being in nature, working with your hands, that kind of allows your mind to wander a bit. So I would say, I would say being back in Kentucky is a very safe and kind of normal place for me to get inspiration and write.
Yeah, for sure.